The next time you receive a paycheck, I want you to do something unusual. I want you to hold it up, and I want you to actually read it. But not the numbers at the bottom, the numbers at the top. Because 3 lines quietly decide how much of your life you get to keep. Federal taxes, as high as 37%. State taxes, as high as 13% in places like California. And FICA, Social Security and Medicare, another 7.65%. This is before groceries, before rent, before you've invested a single dollar. Nearly a third of your income is already gone. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average American household spends the first 3 to 4 months of every single year simply working to pay for taxes. And if you're highly skilled, a doctor or a physician, that number can extend to 5 months or more. So let me ask you something a little bit uncomfortable. Is that normal? You see, as a tax professional, I get asked a different version of that question every single day. Is the tax system fair? And my answer might surprise you. You see, the tax system isn't moral or immoral. It's instructional. The IRS calls our system progressive. The more money you make, the higher the bracket you fall into. Sounds fair on paper. But what most people don't know is that in 2021, companies like Coca-Cola, ESPN, and McDonald's reported billions in revenue, yet paid 0% in corporate federal income tax. 0. So did they cheat? No. They understood the instructions. And Winston Churchill famously stated, "Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." So let's take a look at history. For starters, the IRS is younger than Coca-Cola. You can buy a soft drink from a company that has been around longer than a department that takes nearly a third of your paycheck. And for most of American history, no one filed a tax return. No one. The government was funded entirely off of tariffs, tobacco, and alcohol. Taxes were only introduced during the Civil War, and they were shortly repealed after that. And when they were reintroduced, the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional, which begs an important question. Why does something that's less than 150 years old feel like it's permanent? If taxes were created to fund emergencies, why do we treat them like gravity? Why do we pay taxes when we earn money, again when we spend money, again when we invest money, and again when we pass it on to our heirs? These questions changed my life. And in my early 20s, before I was a tax professional, I was a personal trainer in Hollywood, California. I had money, I had clients coming in, and I thought I had figured it out. Then one day, I got a letter in the mail from the IRS. Now, I didn't open up the envelope right away. I sat in my car for almost 10 minutes just staring at the letter. Not because I was busy, but because I was scared. When I finally opened up the letter, in the top right-hand corner, it read, "Balance due immediately. Federal taxes, state taxes, FICA taxes." The letter said I owed $12,000. I checked my bank account. I had $6,000. And I remember thinking to myself, how is this possible? How do I owe the IRS more money than I physically have? And in that moment, 2 decisions had to be made. One, I needed to figure out how I was going to pay the IRS back. And 2, I needed to move back home with my parents because I could no longer afford rent with that tax bill hanging over my head. This was my introduction to federal income taxes and this mystical man that we call Uncle Sam today. And what I chose to do next is something that most college graduates would rather do anything else than admit. I humbled myself and I called my mom. And I said, "Mom, what am I doing wrong?" And she paused and said something I'll never forget. She said, "Honey, we could have planned for this sooner." And that's when it hit me. You see, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was doing exactly what the system had taught me to do. Earn money, pay taxes, repeat. push-ups and sit-ups. But no one had taught me the rest of the program. So I quit my job, I moved back home, and I went to go work in my family-owned business so I could become more disciplined with my money. Now, what still makes me crack up to this day is my mom had owned a tax and accounting firm for nearly 30 years. She was called America's tax lady online. And there I was, her son, completely lost. I wasn't hiding money, I wasn't cheating, I wasn't reckless. I just didn't know the rules. And that letter didn't change my life because of the amount of money. It changed my life because of what it had revealed. You see, up until that point, I only knew one thing about money: earn it and accept what's left over. But sitting in the car that day, I realized something was missing. There aren't one part or two parts to money. There are three parts to money: earn, keep, grow. Not a slogan, but a sequence. Earn is what everyone talks about. Keep is what most people ignore. And grow is what changes families and generations. Earn without keep is like a treadmill. Keep without grow, well, that's a dead end. And grow without earn, yeah, that's a fantasy. And sitting in the car that day, I had to admit something extremely painful. I knew how to earn, but I had not figured out how to keep. And I certainly didn't figure out how to grow. So, when people came to my mother's office, they normally came in for two very specific reasons. One, to figure out why they owed so much, and two, to file a tax return. And most traditional accounting firms did just that. They solved the problem, they explained the bill, they filed the paperwork. But something was missing. Where was the education? Where was the guidance on how to change the outcome, not just survive it? No one was talking about how to structure income differently, or how to use legal incentives written in the tax code, or how to stop repeating the same outcome from happening every single year. I realized there was a massive gap, the same gap that I had fallen into. And in that moment, I chose to make a decision. I don't want to understand why we pay taxes so much. I want to understand how to pay less taxes legally, intentionally, strategically. So, I went on the internet that night, and I asked the internet one very specific question. What is the highest designation that the IRS gives out without me having to go back to accounting school? And that question led me to the enrolled agents exam. No, not because I wanted to become an accountant. It was because I wanted to understand the code. Because when you understand the code, you know how to ask the right questions and you know the answers to those questions. So, I studied, I passed the exams, and I became federally licensed to represent taxpayers in all 50 states at every level of the IRS. And the best way I can describe what happened next is it felt like I woke up with superpowers. Same rules, same tax code, but now I can see it. Now I can see the options. Taxes weren't confusing. They were directional. The tax code wasn't punishment anymore. It was a roadmap. And that clarity reminded me a lot of the gym. You see, when most people go into the gym, they typically only know two exercises: earn money, pay taxes, push-ups, and sit-ups. They work out, they sweat, they get exhausted, but somehow they never end up getting stronger. And that's because no one taught them the rest of the program. You see, understanding the tax code was like hitting new movements and learning new personal records and hitting new personal records inside of the gym. At first, it's awkward. Then it becomes familiar. And then it becomes powerful. And what I realized is I wasn't just training myself. I was building a system to help people stop guessing and start progressing. So this is what Earn, Keep, and Grow can provide you. It gives you options. Options to invest instead of overpay. Options to be present with your family. Options to not spend 3, 4, or 5 months out of the year simply to work for the IRS. You see, the cost of not knowing doesn't just cost you time, it costs you freedom. Because ignorance compounds, and so does knowledge. So let me leave you with this. Especially if you're a student or standing on the edge of the real world, when you graduate college, the most important thing that you gain is not a job title, it's choice. You don't need to know everything, and you don't need to master every system. But what you do need is one superpower. And that superpower is knowing where to place your time and attention. Because freedom does not come from simply working harder. Freedom comes from understanding better. And the moment you decide to stop outsourcing your understanding is the moment you become a student of the systems that shape your life. You take your power back. You stop paying the lazy tax. You stop accepting the default. And you stop confusing complexity for permanence. And you start seeing the options. This doesn't just change how you move through life. It can change your finances as well. And if an entire generation learned to see the system, not fear it, not ignore it, but understand it, it wouldn't just change our finances, it would change our culture. Thank you.